So that just gives you a bit of an outline. I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction. We're going to look at the concepts behind what we're talking about. So this first section is going to be mostly theory, and then I'll actually run you through all these exercises as a big group, and you can actually practice what we're talking about, right? To begin with, the why is pretty obvious. Strong abs are great if you want to squat heavy and deadlift heavy. They are also incredibly important if you don't want to hurt your back. We've had a few people screw their backs up in various ways in the gym over the years, and it almost always comes down to an inability to control their core properly, right? That ability to brace properly under heavy load, to brace hard while you're still fatigued, things like that, it's probably the most important skill you can learn in the lifting realm. In terms of, when I say core, like it's probably one of the most overused phrases in the fitness industry. When I'm talking about core, I'm not just talking about your abs. What we're actually talking about is everything that makes up your torso, essentially from your nipples to your hips. And in many cases, we're also talking about the stuff in the hip, right? In case you haven't figured it out yet, your body does not work in isolation. That's why we always talk about movements, not muscles. And this is a whole unit, right? We're going to look at the anatomy and stuff in a second. I'll talk you through the different abs, how it all works, how it fits together as a piece. But ultimately, you don't need to know the individual parts as long as you can control the whole piece, right? The flexibility, mobility, stability, right? They are essentially, it's a three-tiered system. Starting at flexibility, right? These terms are often confused. They are often misrepresented. It starts at flexibility, which is, in my head, is passive range of motion. You lie on the floor, how much flexibility do you have in a joint if you give me a leg and I move it around, right? That is the range of motion through your joint. It's passive. Most of you, we can lie you on the floor and you can almost knee yourself in the head, but you couldn't do that if you were squatting, right? And that's the difference between flexibility and mobility. So mobility is an active range of motion. So it's the ability to move through that range in an active way under your own power rather than having someone move you through that range. Stability is the next piece. That's being able to control that active range of motion. So this is where we get into the concept of a mobility-stability continuum, right? I'm sure some of you have heard me talk about this before, but it is essentially a continuum. At one end is very mobile people, and at the other end are very stable, much stiffer people, right? Generally, women are more mobile than men. I don't know all of the anatomy behind that, but a lot of it's got to do with fiber types and hormonal levels. And where you fall on that continuum determines what you're going to need most in terms of your training to improve performance, right? If you're right up the mobility end and you're super hypermobile and you've got heaps of joint laxity, what you're going to need is a lot of stability work. You're going to need to practice all of that stuff to prevent you from hurting yourself through those ranges of motion, right? Moving on to sort of building on that is the concept of a kinetic chain. This is something that I thought I put a picture in here for, but I didn't. It's this idea that the joints and areas of your body alternate in roles between mobility and stability, right? It works, as I said, like a chain. So generally they alternate as you go up, right? So from the ground up, your feet are stable, right? So the arch in your foot is your foot stability mechanism. If your feet are stable, then your ankles can do their job and be mobile. Your knees are stable. Your hips are supposed to be mobile. Your torso is stable. Your thoracic spine, so your upper back is mobile. Your shoulders are mobile, elbows are stable, wrists are mobile, right? Sort of alternates through that. If one piece in that chain is not up to scratch, is not doing its intended purpose, what you find is compromises somewhere else, right? The two most common ones are like a hip pinching or an inability to squat all the way down is almost always to do with a lack of stability in the torso. If you've ever squatted and felt a pinch at the front of your hips as you hit depth, that is almost always just because your brace is ineffective and you're not in the right position. There are some anatomical differences person to person in terms of the shape of your hips and things like that that will influence that, but ultimately everyone's pretty much born with a very similar range, and what it is whether you use that range regularly or not. This idea of the chain is an evolutionary protective mechanism. Your body's really good at you not dying, like that is your evolutionary purpose at a baseline. And so your body's always going to try and protect you from things that are going to hurt you, right? That's why if your torso is not stable and your hips have to take over that role of stability, that's why you get hip pain. That's why people start, not being able to squat properly and they fuck their hips up, because instead of going through a full range of motion, your hips are having to build all that mechanical stability themselves rather than letting the muscles of your torso do that. From there, we look at the role of your abs, right? Now, the way I think about this is that your abs aren't there to generate movement. Like sit-ups are a great example, right? Everyone's done sit-ups at some point. You're not going to spot reduce fat and give you rippling abs with 3 minutes a day. But more importantly, especially when we're looking at a performance standpoint, but also in just general life, when have you ever violently had to go like this? Unless you've had a serious bout of gastrointestinal distress, you probably haven't. So in my head, it makes those sort of flexion-based movements rather useless, right? I don't look at the abs and the muscles of your torso as movement generators, right? Generally, their role is stability, not movement generation. So anti-movement's the way that's often referred to. So when you squat, we want your abs to be braced so that you don't flex and you don't extend, right? So their role is anti-flexion and anti-extension. So that is then reflected in the way we train the abs for performance in this respect. I'll go into that as we get further into things, but it's things like rollouts and stuff like that are going to be more effective than crunches and other things like that, right? The final important piece in this sort of introduction is the idea that breathing and bracing are two separate skills. For a long time, when I first learned about this, I taught them as the same skill. Like you breathe and you brace at the same time. Only relatively recently, as I've got more into this, have I realized that that's wrong. You need to be able to separate your ability to brace from your breathing, especially because that then becomes an issue under fatigue. If you're at the end of a heavy set of 10 and breathing hard, and you can't maintain a brace while breathing hard, that's when you're going to get hurt, right? As we go through, we're going to look at the anatomy of your abs, but then also respiration itself, and you'll get an understanding of how it all comes together as we go through. But for now, just keep in mind that the ability to breathe and the ability to brace are two separate things, and we need to treat them as two separate things. So in terms of anatomy and physiology, it's like an 1800s anatomy slide that I found that was cool. If we look at the abs, you have, I'm going to put this down here and not knock it all over my new computer. We're going to look at each of the muscles individually and then start to talk about how it works together as one whole piece. So this is obviously a sagittal plane cross-section. The first muscle we're looking at is your rectus abdominis, which is essentially the muscles of your six-pack, right? They are the most superficial layer of the abs. Everyone has one. They're in there somewhere. Otherwise, you'd all fold into pieces. I just like to keep mine warm in winter and summer and autumn and spring. They essentially, as you can sort of see here, they connect the front of your rib cage to your pelvis, right? It's the most superficial layer. The fibers run up and down like that, right? You then have your external obliques, which are here. They are just below the rectus abdominis. They sort of fan out like this, and they connect the bottom 8 ribs, I believe it is, to your pelvis. The description I've heard is the way the fibers run is like the same direction your fingers would be if you put your hands in your pockets, right? So they fan out like that. Then you have your internal obliques, which are, again, a layer underneath that, and they sort of run more horizontally and connect, again, your rib cage to your pelvis. So you're going to keep hearing me talk about the connection between your ribs and your pelvis, right? This is the most important connection because it's where all your abs are and it's how it all works together. Then below that, you have your transverse abdominis, your TA. This one's often neglected in generic core training. If you've ever been and seen Rob, the physio, and had back problems and or hip problems, chances are he's tried to get you to contract your TA, and most of you suck at it. I'm one of those people. Everyone sucks at it. The feeling you're looking for when contracting your TA is the feeling you would have if you were peeing and had to stop peeing. The less relevant cue for 60% of you is, boys, pull your nuts up. Yep, see? Mike's trying it, and he's just figured it out. He does. No, neither do I, and that's why I don't mention it. So they're the muscles of your actual abs. Obviously, there's all the muscles in your lower back as well. Their role is obviously relevant to the whole process, but we're just not going to touch on that because looking at the muscles of your spine is a much deeper piece that we need to look at because it's a whole back piece. It's all a little too deep for the scope of today. So in terms of respiration, right? That's patronizing, which means talking down to people. So respiration, like, as far as I can tell, you've all been breathing pretty well for most of your life. You haven't died yet. Most people, when I say we're going to look at how you breathe, especially the newer people, will look at me funny. Like, well, I know how to breathe. Most of you don't, right? From an anatomical standpoint, you have two major muscles or groups of muscles that you breathe with, and then there are some ancillary muscles at the top end. The first and most important piece of that is your diaphragm. Diaphragm's like a dome or cone-shaped piece of connective tissue that sits at the bottom of your lungs. It's sort of cone-shaped when you're relaxed, or when it's relaxed. And when it contracts, it pulls down, it creates negative pressure in your abdominal cavity. That draws the air into your lungs. If you ever had hiccups, that's your diaphragm contracting involuntarily and is extremely frustrating. But I have this running theory that if you understand this stuff and the breathing and bracing side of things, you can cure hiccups on a relatively reliable, in a relatively reliable process. You do have to understand how to control your diaphragm. I haven't perfected this theory yet. This is a working theory. But I have gotten pretty good at curing my own hiccups because I understand how to sort of push into my diaphragm. It's like any cramp or anything like that, right? My theory is if you sort of push down on it and hold it in that position, you can prevent it from firing through that hiccup stage and calm the hiccups out. It works about 80% of the time. Yeah, but I've also been hiccuping for long periods of time and it's infuriating. So I'm working on this theory. The diaphragm is really important because its relation to the muscles of your pelvic floor, we will talk about when we look at the actual bracing side of things. But for now, you need to know that that's very important. The next one is your external and internal intercostals. They are the muscles between your ribs. their role is to expand your rib cage as you inhale, and that allows room for your lungs to inflate, right? Your external intercostals are the ones that expand your rib cage under inspiration. When you exhale, forcibly your internal intercostals are activated. Their role is less clear, according to most anatomy textbooks. The external ones are the ones that matter. You then have your scalenes, your pec minor, and your sternocleidomastoid, which is the muscle in your neck when you like tense your neck. That's that bit there. So they're all up here, right? Their role is to elevate your rib cage to allow the final bit of room you need for your lungs to inflate under heavy cardiorespiratory load, right? So if you're running, fuck knows why, but let's say you are, hypothetically, generally you'll be breathing much heavier and you'll be getting that big chest breath, right? That's that final piece that allows that extra bit of room that you need to inflate your lungs. Now, your body also, because of that, interprets that as quite a stressful state, right? Because when you're under that sort of load, you're stressed, right? Now, modern society has put us all in this position, and so what you'll find is most people breathe into their chest in that position, right? So your body's under this constant stress load because of the way you're breathing, and this is where that starts to play into, am I boring you, Eddie? That starts to play into the fatigue state that you get through long-term training and that sort of thing, right? If you're constantly stressed, your body's never down regulating, and so you're not recovering properly. So most of your breathing at rest should be done in and out through your nose. So if you're all just sitting there for a second, if you're leaning back too casually, just sit up for a second, and then all of you take a big breath, right? If you go and your chest rises, you're just breathing into the top half of your lungs, right? The best way to do this is actually cross your hands over and put them on your clavicles, right? So in this position, now take a deep breath, right? If your clavicles move at all, you are not breathing properly, right? So your clavicles rising is that scalenes, pec minor, and muscles in your neck lifting your rib cage. So what we need to do is obviously fix that, right? Now, the way I like to think about breathing is you're breathing into like an empty vessel, right? A sink, a bucket, whatever it is. If you're filling it up with water, you can't fill a sink up from the top down. But when your clavicles rise like that, that's what you're trying to do, right? So you're not actually utilizing the whole capacity of your lungs, but also you're not properly activating your diaphragm, which then carries over into how your bracing strategies work, right? So in order to practice this, you want breathing in and out through your nose, right? Now, in sort of putting together my ideas for this workshop, I looked at a video with Chris Duffin, who's the guy that invented the shoulder rock and some other things. Crazy dude, but big on breathing, bracing, and that sort of stuff. And he talks about this drill where if you're breathing in through your nose, if you imagine like breathing in through the very end of your nose, right? You get almost that like snort you would get if you're a pig. It's that, like that, right? Now, if you do that, what you're going to find is your clavicles are still going to rise. So the drill he uses, and I want you all to try this, is to put your fingers right up in the bridge of your nose, right? In between your eyes. You can sort of rub it a little bit just to become aware of that piece, right? Then what you've got to be able to do is breathe from that position. So imagine you've got two little balloons up in the bridge of your nose like that, and you're trying to breathe in, so inhale through those balloons. What you should be able to do is get that to then pull down into your belly, right? So if you do that and have your hands on your clavicles, you shouldn't have your collarbones rise while you do it, right? So it's learning to breathe. That's activating your diaphragm, right? That's getting you to breathe down into the bottom of your lungs. Now, this breathing side of things is something you should be practicing every day, right? The common prescriptions, 3 times a day, 20 conscious breaths, right? So just at some point, whether you're sitting at your desk at work or in the shower or anything like that, just stop for, it's only really going to be 30 seconds and just focus on breathing in through the nose and getting it up into that bridge of your nose and down into the bottom of your diaphragm, right? The more aware of this stuff you are, the more regularly you can practice it, the better you're going to be. When I started learning about this stuff, I actually realized I'd been doing some of this subconsciously for a lot of my life because I've been really fat for a long time. And I realized that if I stand upright and I breathe into my belly, I look way skinnier than I do when I stand like this, right? And this was something I've only realized that I did subconsciously as a kid, but that has meant I've actually been okay at breathing from when I really started to learn about this stuff. But the more you're aware of it, the more you practice it. Now, I don't claim to be perfect at any of this. I don't think any of you have ever heard me claim to be perfect. I'm good, but I'm not perfect. And so this is something even I practice on a daily basis. It does become like a form of meditation, which I think we can all probably do with sometimes. Just that opportunity to stop and not think about anything other than just breathing in and out for a bit. If you find that's a little too hippy-dippy for your liking, then feel free to just think about squatting more than you currently do, because this will help you do that. It's also really good to do just before you go to bed. It's a really good way of just sort of lying there, focusing on your breathing. It'll help you sort of switch off a little bit and sleep better. Sleep is a whole other kettle of fish. At some point I'm going to do something like this for recovery. And your options in recovery. So we'll go into that in more detail then. Yes, basically I'm going to turn up, you guys are all going to turn up and I'll be asleep on the floor and you've just got to take notes. Only for you, I'll be asleep. I didn't say I'd be on the floor, I'm totally on that couch. Maybe I did. Anyway. No, I am not. Okay, so that's a little overview of the breathing side of things, right? That obviously, because you're using a lot of the same muscles, carries into the bracing side of things. Because it's all about the relationship between your diaphragm and your pelvic floor, right? So some of you will have heard me talk about the idea that your core is a cylinder, right? As I said, it's the relationship between your diaphragm and your pelvic floor. Now imagine your core as a cylinder where the diaphragm is the top of that cylinder, the muscles of your pelvic floor, so the muscles in your pelvis, are the bottom of that cylinder, and your abs, obliques, and lower back are the surrounds of that cylinder, right? Empty Coke can would take most of you in terms of body weight. Eddie, you and I are fucked. I tried it the other day. It doesn't work when you're this big. But if you stand on an empty Coke can, it is structurally sound, right? It will take your weight. You put a dent in that can and it crumbles. Same idea with your torso, right? So it's about getting your diaphragm to be essentially parallel to your pelvic floor. So not being in this position or in that position, because you're losing the structural stability of that cylinder, right? When I first got into powerlifting, like Westside Barbell was really big, and they talk about the way they teach the squat, because they all squat super wide and super high. They talk about sitting back first, right? So I always used to squat by going like this and then really arching my back into the squat. And I quickly figured out that is a great way to fuck your hips right up and have no stability, right? So as we go through this bracing stuff, especially once we get into the exercise, we're going to talk all about setting that relationship and being able to maintain that, right? At some point, once you start to get the bracing side of things, brace with your core set properly, and then try and brace in an anteriorly tilted position like that, right? What you're going to find is you can't get any real pressure in that position because you've opened that cylinder up. It's often referred to as an open scissor position, right? Because it looks like a pair of scissors, opens right up if your pelvis is tilted and your rib cage is up. So in terms of getting that cylinder to work, as I said, we need to be able to set that position, right? So a lot of you, women in general have a bigger anterior tilt of the pelvis than men. Smooth, Tom, real smooth. So you are going to be slightly more into that position. It's not necessarily about getting right into a perfect position, but it's about being as close to parallel as you can be. You can't make up for your bony structures. You can't change that shit, except if you want to go and throw yourselves into walls and shit like that. You'll break things, but that won't be good. I've got plates and screws in my elbow, and it doesn't help. So what we've got to do is be able to build that cylinder first, right? Create that relationship. That's the first step in that bracing thing. You can't brace if you're here. If you can set everything in the right position, you can lock that brace in, and then the sequence with which you need to set that brace essentially works from the deep muscles up, right? So the first step is that TA contraction, that stopping your P feeling. Then it's about being able to brace and bear down on your diaphragm. This is why I always tell new people you should shit before you squat, because otherwise you'll get 2/3 of the way through your warm-ups and have to go for a short break. Or a long break, depending on how you like to poo. No, I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do it. I have definitely been down that road. Fine as a raw lifter, not so good as an equipped lifter, because trying to get your squat suit off while going to the toilet is not fun.
So what you're saying is if you feel the need to do a shit mid-squat, you're doing it right.
Or you didn't poo early. But yeah, in general. Yeah, look, as long as it's just a feeling, not an action, I reckon you'll be okay.
So is that the same as the pelvic floor?
Yeah, it's that whole area. It's that lift up, right? It's not actually the same because it's slightly different muscles, but it's the same, for this purpose, it's essentially the same thing. Pelvic floor TA goes first, then it's that bearing down on your diaphragm. Then what you need to be able to do is push out into your obliques, right? So this is where belts come into play. A belt is not magic. A belt will not prevent you from hurting your back. I have seen plenty of lifters blow discs out, do all kinds of fucked up shit with belts on, right? They're not magic. What they do is allow you to create more pressure in your abdominal cavity, right? So what we're looking for is, the technical term is intra-abdominal pressure, right? The ability to create pressure within your abdominal cavity. Now, you have to be able to do this without a belt, because if you can't, wearing a belt's not going to help. It might make you feel better, but I guarantee you it won't save your back. So that intra-abdominal pressure is, once you've built that cylinder, then you're going to pressurize it to give it structural stability, right? So that's where the breathing piece comes into. You've got to be able to create that brace and breathe separate, right? So if you're all just sitting there, you can brace your abs like you would for a squat, right? Dig your fingers into your obliques and then breathe in and out. Can you hold that brace while you're breathing in and out? Often you'll probably find you can hold it as you breathe in, and then as you breathe out, you lose it, right? So this is where that fatigue thing comes into play. This is why a lot of people get injured doing things like CrossFit, because they haven't stressed enough the ability to brace under fatigue like that. So suddenly you're 50 million reps into your 70 million snatch rep workout, and you can no longer effectively brace your core because you're going the whole time, and suddenly you throw that snatch or you hit that squat and you're out of position, you're screwed, right? So this is why when practicing these sort of things, you need to be doing 3s and 5s, not 10s. Because by rep, I didn't say you're not going to do 10s, just not while practicing this. Because I want quality, not quantity, right? So I'd rather you do 10 sets of 3 than 3 sets of 10 when it comes to practicing your bracing. And the same goes for technical skill, right? If you're practicing your squat technique or your deadlift technique, you should be doing it in 3s and 5s, not 10s. because, yeah, essentially by the end of set of 10, you're so fatigued that you can't do anything properly. I'd rather you start again and give yourself that break. So as I said, the belt just allows you to create more pressure, right? As we go through a lot of this stuff, when we go through the actual progressions, a lot of it's going to be you poking yourself in the stomach, right? Again, while researching this, I was looking at Japanese guys there, some ridiculous Japanese name, Okinawians or something. I can't remember. Sorry?
The super old ones?
Yeah, not quite super old, but it's just a different way of looking at this. They, in order to teach you to brace, will come up and smack you in the guts. And not like a light little love tap, like kick you from the sides and that sort of thing, right? Because it's that same bracing thing. If you've ever done any sort of martial arts or anything, you've ever been hit in the guts, it's that bearing down that you need. But also what it is going to be finding soft spots, right? So often people will be tight at the front because you're good at bracing the front side, poke you in the ribs or in the obliques, and it's soft as butter, right? So you need to be able to create equal pressure the whole way around, because if you can't, that's when you're going to start to get injured, right? As we go through this, you'll see we start a lot of this lying on the floor so that you can use the floor as feedback, right? You'll be able to feel your back pushing into it, things like that. So that's where the belt comes into it. I have used with some success for some people, like Dyer does it quite well, putting your belt on but not doing it up. So the belt is just there as a proprioceptive cue, right? It's just there to remind you to breathe into that as an extra sort of stimulus, right? In the same way that you can put your fingers into your ribs, you can do that sort of thing. Yeah, good one, Mike. Because it just allows you to feel those differences, right? And feel the difference between side to side and front and back. The more you are aware of this, the better you are, right? This, whether it be bracing or technical skill or any of that, it all comes down to self-awareness and your ability to feel where your body is in space. These sort of things just add in a little bit of extra input, and so the volume of that feedback is louder. So it makes life a bit easier. You should be able to do it without the belt, but if you are struggling with it, wearing a really, really loose belt is a good way of having that physical reminder. Then we go into how we train things, right? Now, in a minute, I'm going to go, or once we get sort of through this, we're going to go through a whole progression, right? Starting at the real baseline and then working our way up. There'll be points at which you just are incapable of doing this properly. I totally expect that. There are points in this progression that I suck at, most of them. But the more you can be aware of it and build on it, the better you're going to be. And most of this will actually be more than enough core training when combined with squatting and deadlifting heavy, right? Like I said earlier, I don't like sit-ups, I don't like those sort of things because they're not as effective. Most of it's just going to be practicing this and then applying it to the squat and deadlift, right? So this is why we talk about in a squat, like holding your breath and holding that brace through the whole rep. But that's not to say you can't breathe in and out while squatting, right? Because if you're good enough, you should be able to separate the brace from the breathing side and be able to do both. When it comes to how hard you're bracing, that is like a scale, right? It shouldn't be binary. It shouldn't be on-off. It should be a range in terms of intensity, right? There's a guy from Sydney, Anthony Lowe, who's a physio. He does a lot of women's pelvic floor, pelvic health stuff. If you ever have a problem peeing yourself deadlifting, ladies, he's the guy to talk to. He talks about tension to task, right? So the amount of tension you have in your brace has to match the task that you are doing. If you are a 300 kilo squatter and you are like max effort bracing for a 60 kilo squat, you're probably doing it wrong. You're just going to fatigue yourself the whole way up, right? So, you need to be able to match the intensity of your brace to the weight on the bar, essentially. You still need to be able to brace with an empty bar, but that brace is going to get more and more intense as the weight goes up. That's a skill. Most of you will find initially that you can either do it or you can't. Like, there isn't a sliding scale. The more you, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at being able to ramp that tension up as you go through things. Does that make sense? This is where the individual application of this to how you squat and how you deadlift is always going to be different, right? The fundamental principles are the same, but how you apply them into your squatting system or your deadlifting system varies. Personally, I've found like my conventional deadlift has gone up a lot since I moved from trying to brace in the bottom position, so just kind of bending over and creating my brace from down here, to actively standing up, setting all my brace up, taking my breath, and then going down to get the bar, right? So I am giving myself the best possible advantage in this position because I'm open and I can get everything there. Whereas when I come down into this position, I don't have the leverage. I can't, like, everything's sort of bunched up on myself. So I find it much harder to get that position. So just being aware of how you set up and starting to play around with these things. I do it in my warm-ups. This is where having that system is key because you can start to change variables here and there. Can you hold the brace for 3 reps? Can you hold the brace for 5 reps? When do you have to breathe? Can you breathe and brace? These are all things that you're going to have to work on over time. Today is not going to be a be-all, end-all, like, yep, sweet, got my abs under control, never have to think about that again. What I really want to do is just give you the ideas of how it starts to progress and how to apply all of that to the lifting side of things. So we talked earlier, or I talked earlier, you guys listened, about movement and anti-movement, right? So this is why we don't do sit-ups. As I said in the post yesterday, this is why maybe the shake weight could be a good idea, because it's about anti-movement, right? So it's about the ability to create that brace and resist movement. So this is where the exercises I like to use for ab work are things like real max intensity planks, like I was showing you the other day, Mary, and we're going to go through that in a minute. Things like ab wheel or rollouts, that's an anti-extension movement, right? So you set into a brace, and as you roll out, you're resisting the extension. So it's anti-extension, it's not a flexion movement. There are a variety of different ways to train that, and we're going to sort of go through that as we go, but that's what we're looking for in a good core exercise. One of the best ones you can do is things like farmer's walks. Whether you do them bilaterally, like weight in each hand, or you do them unilaterally, so a weight in one hand, all of that's about setting a brace and being able to move your limbs around that brace, right? This is where it connects into your hip range of motion and things like that. If you're stable through the core, you will have a better range of motion. The best example is, here, Mary, come and lie here for a second. So, arch your back, stick your bum out, give me this leg straight. So, that's where Mary's hamstring stops, right? Because her hips are protecting her from hurting herself. Now, relax, big breath in, push it all out hard. Push, 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 push. Now, give me that leg. See the extra range she gets there? Not a lot, because Mary's not very good at bracing yet. But we're going to get to that point. But you can see just that little bit of extra range comes from the body having the stability it needs to protect itself. So this is how it all sort of ties together, is if you can't stabilize your core, your body's going to not let you get the ranges you need. And that's when you end up with like hip issues, shoulder issues, all of those sort of things almost always stem from something in the core not working the way it should. Does that make sense? So before we go through the practical side of things, does anyone have any questions? Don't all ask at once.
I still can't figure out how to, like you say, it's easier to brace into the front.
Yep.
How do you expand it into the sides? Because I can't.
Put your fingers into it.
Yeah.
And then just work on trying to bear down into that. So start with one side. So bear down and push out onto that side, right?
Yeah.
So it's literally just practice. And it's the sort of practice that's my favorite kind of practice because you can do it sitting on the couch or lying on the floor. We will have a break for a moment. Get up, stretch your legs, grab a drink if you need to. And then we're going to go through the practical side of these progressions and how it all works. Sweet? I'll give you 2 minutes and then we'll go from there. Okay, so for the first part of this, you can all take your feet off the wall and put your feet flat on the floor.
Oh, flat on the floor.
Okay, so in this position, we start you in this position because... Are you paying attention or do I have to put you in timeout? So we put you in this position because it's easier to teach you to brace in this position because you don't have to fight against gravity, right? When you're standing up, you're going to have to fight against gravity, so it's going to be a little bit harder. So in this position, the first step in this bracing sequence is the pelvic floor, the deep abdominal contraction, right? So the first drill we're going to do is literally all you're going to do is lift 1 foot off the floor at a time. Not yet. 1 foot off the floor at a time. You're only going to lift it about an inch, right? This is just testing your ability to brace and then maintain that without losing it as you lift one of your feet, right? So what I want you to do, and for the purposes of all these breathing drills, you're going to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. When you breathe out through your mouth, I want you to think about a forceful exhale. So it's like blowing up a balloon. It's not just a passive, but it is a really active push, right? Now, if you exhale hard, what you should feel is your rib cage start to come down and your belly button will be essentially sucked into your spine as you flatten your belly out, right? Now, as you exhale fully, you're essentially setting that brace, right? You are building your cylinder. You're getting your diaphragm to match your pelvic floor and be parallel there. What I need you to do now is all of you take a big breath in, and then as you exhale, I want you to push hard, get that belly to come down, your abs to contract as you come down. Once you get to full exhale, I want a deep ab contraction. So that's that stopping your pee feeling. Then what you need to be able to do is hold that brace and very slowly lift one of your feet off the floor. Now, that was too fast, Venny. Very slowly. It should take you half a second just to get the weight off your foot, right? What I want you to start to notice is, do you shift to one side as you lift that foot up? What you'll probably find is one side's going to be stronger than the other, and you'll feel your whole pelvis and torso will twist as you lift your foot because you're having to hold that pressure as you take the weight off one of your feet. Getting old, Mike. Yeah. So,
Are you okay?
so with this, it's really only a very small movement, but you should start to notice that pelvis, right? Now, in that position, what I want you to be able to do is, in the interest of increasing your brace, what you're going to do is try and push your back into the floor. So imagine I've got a bit of like seatbelt or a strap or something under your upper back or your sort of mid back. If I was to pull on that, can you hold it into the ground? Right? So you've got to be able to maintain that brace by pushing down with your back. Your lower back shouldn't be completely flat, but there should be a noticeable flattening out as you exhale, right? That's the first step in that brace. If you can hold all of that down and then hold that deep ab contraction, you're going to be much better off. So this is the first step in that process. What's up, Eddie? You look lost.
Do you have a breath in or out?
For now, I want you to be able to do this independent of your breath. We're using the exhale to set the position of the brace, and then you need to be able to hold that brace. So do it while holding your breath out, because that'll be you have set the brace, and then you can hold that position, and then you can start to incorporate breathing into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you shouldn't have a breath in you when you lift your foot off.
For now, no. As you get better, what you can do is set the brace, breathe into that brace, and then hold it as you lift your foot. Vern's watching YouTube in the background.
You guys climb rocks.
Yeah, there you go. So that's the first step, right? Is just that deep abdominal contraction. Can you hold it while you change what your pelvis position is? The next step in this is the beginning of the dead bug sequence. I used to call these dead bugs with your feet on the floor, but I have since decided they're called wall bugs, and then we'll progress to dead bugs. So what I now need you to all do is put your feet flat on the wall so that your hips and knees are at 90 degrees. Ah, Steph, you broke the fucking wall. Okay, so this position is where we start the next part of the sequence. In this position, you're going to sit with or set with your hands straight up in the air. What you're going to then do is take a big breath in. As you exhale, you're focusing on that big push hard out with the air. Ribs come down. Then you're going to go deep abdominal contraction. Then you're going to brace. So bear down, lock everything in, and then very slowly raise your right arm over your head. Can you hold that brace while your arm moves over your head? If your rib cage lifts at all, you have failed this drill. You need to be able to lock your rib cage down and hold that position. Then you can alternate between hands. You don't have to hang out with your arm over your head. This is literally just lock the brace down and move through that range. You may find again that one side is better than the other, or you might find both of them suck. Can you all feel what I'm talking about here? So you should be able to hold your brace and then move your shoulder without the brace letting go. If you can't hold that brace and you have to like lift your rib cage to get your arm over your head, then your bracing is not of a high enough quality.
And you will be dismissed.
Yes, you will be sent home with a note to your parents. So the next step in this sequence is to make the dead bug one step harder, right? What I now want you to do is if you have enough room behind you, just move away from the wall. If you are Steph and you're going to headbutt the leg press, maybe just move out of that position. But you're going to move away from the wall, but you're going to set in the same position. So your hips and knees are going to be at 90 degrees. You're going to set your brace, so that's that big breath in, set your brace, big exhale, and then what you need to be able to do is you go right hand, left leg. So you're straightening one hand and one leg at the same time. And again, Mary, feel free to like move out here and have some room. So I'll get a texture and I'll mark it for you. So can you, in that position, sit with your hips and knees at 90 degrees, your hands straight up in the air, and can you maintain your brace while just breathing in and out? That's the step, right? Get that brace set, then focus on breathing in and out, but then you can add in the movement. Can you all start to feel your abs doing something here? So,
I reckon if you put a plate on it, you can see if they're bracing or not.
yeah. So Vanny's got the right idea. If you are struggling with the feeling of the brace, putting a weight plate on your belly is a good way of doing it, because it'll sort of push you into that full exhale and locking everything down. If I can if when your hand, like one hand's out, one leg's out, if I can slide my hand under your lower back, there's too much room there and you've lost your brace. The tilt of your pelvis should be a good indicator as well, right? If you can set it properly, you should have your pelvis sort of tucked back into a neutral position. Eddie's choking to death. Great. So you should be able to feel yourself holding that position as you go through that. If you lose it at all, you need to stop and just rest for a second and then start again, right? So you don't necessarily have to, if you're finding straightening your leg out is a little too intense and you can't quite maintain it, you can actually just keep your knee bent and extend your hip, right? So you're just dropping your foot straight down onto the floor rather than straightening your leg right out. That's a slightly less painful way of doing it, a slightly easier way of doing it. Takes some of the weight out of it. So if you get a program and it says dead bugs in it, this is what I want you to be doing. If you struggle with this really hard about maintaining that position, then do it against the wall and just move your arms. This is then the second progression from there. Does anyone have any questions on that stuff so far? Once, twice, 3 times? Does everyone want to stay here for a little bit longer or do you want to just move on? Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing, but you're going to do it on hands and knees instead of on your back.
From cold backs to sore knees.
I'm sorry, I didn't turn the underfloor heating on. If you all want to pay $500 a month, I will happily heat the place.
Excuse me.
Not like that, though.
Holding ours in.
That's his diaphragm working.
Okay, so in this position, I want your knees to be at 90 degrees so you're directly under your hips. And, yeah, if you need to, you can grab, there's a couple of mats, or you can just find a bit of carpet and or rubber. You don't have to be just on the lino. So this is called a bird dog. It is essentially, as I said, the same, sorry Nick, I will get out of your way. It is the same drill we were just doing, just the other way up, right? So if you think about the dead bug that we were just doing as an anti-extension drill, right? So we were resisting the urge to extend through your back and have your rib cage lift up. This is the same thing, but it's also an anti-flexion drill. So what I want you to do, with your knees directly under your hips, your hands directly under your shoulders, I want you to take a big breath in, and then get that full exhale. Feel your belly button come into your stomach. Lock your brace in, deep abdominal contraction, and then all you're going to do is very slowly lift one hand up off the floor to straight. If you twist it all, you lost it. If you lose that brace, you need more work from there. The next step above this is to go opposite hand and leg at the same time. So you would go right hand, left leg. But can you maintain that brace? Venny, the answer is no. Your ass is big enough, I can see it from over here. So this isn't about getting the full range straight away, right? With all of these drills, what I want is quality over quantity, which sometimes means you need to regress to the easiest option, not the hardest option straight away. There is nothing wrong with that. That is going to be the way that carries over best to learning all of this in the long run, right? Focus on holding that brace and alternating sides. Move slow and controlled so you can feel everything go. Adrian, that was too far. You lost it right as you got to the end range. So if you can't hold it the whole way through, don't hold it. Like, don't go the full range. Only go to the point just before you feel you're going to lose it and then come back, rather than going to the point where you're going through your ability to brace. Does that make sense? All answered at once. Great. Thanks, guys.
You're even tall. Busy.
Can't brace and talk at the same time.
So can you all feel what I'm talking about here?
Yes.
Excellent. So the more advanced version of a bird dog becomes a bear crawl. For some reason, this is all about being a beast. I don't know why. A bear crawl is, Annie, how good are you at bear crawls? So come back to there. Stay where you are. Put your toes, like dig your toes in the ground. Michael, shut up. Come back down. All Annie's going to do is in this position, she's going to brace. Then she's going to take her knees off the ground, take her weight through her hands and toes. So in that position, then brace, go right hand, left foot at the same time. You're going to step forward. Too far. So what I want, and I'm not very good at this either.
My head looks like a Port Beckler.
So it's that, not that.
Ah, true.
It is just there, right? Because you've got to be able to, yeah, look, most of you are going to suck at this. But this is just the next step in the progression, right? So can you move your hands or your arms and legs? Annie, your knees are too far out.
Never travel in any other style.
So what Annie did was a great example of what not to do in that position. Because if you could see what she was doing, she's twisting the whole time, right? The whole idea is a stable torso and your limbs moving, not this. So yeah, that's the next step. If you can get the dead bug, bird dog progression reasonably well, this is just the next step. Even just holding yourself in that position and focusing on maintaining the brace while breathing in that position is going to be plenty of work for most of you. Yeah, I know. Not you.
I didn't tell him. I was like, what are they doing? I didn't realize he was behind me.
Okay, so the next step is a rollout, right? Can you grab me the Swiss ball and an ab roller? So this is another one that is consistently butchered by people who think they know what they're doing. I'm going to borrow this. So I don't quite have the mobility to do it on a roller, right? So the easiest version of this starts with a Swiss ball, right? In this position, I'm going to set my brace, and then what I'm going to do is pivot forward on my knees, right? So you can see here, I'm still maintaining that brace, and then all I'm doing is rolling out to the point where I can hold that brace, and then coming back. What I'm not going to do is roll out and then lose that brace and try and come back again, right? Because again, with all of this, it's about being able to only move through the range that you can control. So the ball's the first easy step. Personally, I don't have the shoulder mobility to do it on a roller, like an ab roller, but fucking athlete. But it's the same thing, right? Set your brace and roll out to the point where you can hold it and then come back. That was probably too far. So you need to be able to go to there and then bring it back from there, right? I would suggest most of you start with the Swiss ball because that's the easiest option. So this is why we do things like this. So you know these things. So you can all have a go at that while we talk through the next one. The next one's like a prone hold or a plank, right? This is traditionally done for an extended period of time. Like, can I hold a 5-minute plank? Well, that doesn't actually matter because if you think about what we're doing this all for, right, it's for max effort squats and deadlifts. If you're squatting max effort for 5 minutes, you're probably dead. Yeah, exactly. So a real max effort squat's only going to take maybe 5-10 seconds at most. So what we're going to do is, what we're going to do is train your abs in a way that mimics that, right? So have you all done a plank or a prone hold before? Okay, so I want you all to get in that position. If you didn't want to do any of the actual bracing work, don't come to the fucking bracing workshop.
My knees hurt, all right?
Well, fortunately, the plank is done on your toes, so you don't have to worry about that.
Oh, we're doing this.
No, when I said when you all just get into the plank position, what I meant was, Annie, you just stand there. So you don't all have to be holding straight away. You can just relax for a second. I'm just going to talk you through how I want you to set it up, right? Toes and elbows is the first way to do it. If you struggle on your toes, just go on your knees and elbows. That works fine too. What you need to do is be lying with your elbows directly under your shoulders. So often you'll see people with their elbows way inside their shoulders. Those of you like Mike, Venny and I who are of the wider genetic makeup will find you need to have your elbows a little bit wider, right? So set in that position. What you're going to do is while you're lying flat on the floor, because I want you to be able to set this on the floor. Not like that, Mike, you fucking idiot. So in that position with your elbows set up, your toes set up, what I want you to do is set your brace, right? So take a big breath in, exhale hard, lock it all down, deep abdominal contraction, big brace, bear down, and then you're going to lift off the floor and maintain that position, right? Adrian, tuck your pelvis. Yeah, there you go. So what you don't want is stripper ass, right? In that position, you need your pelvis to be connected to your ribs. You're going to maintain that position. Then you're going to brace as hard as you can. You're going to pull your elbows to your knees and your toes to your elbows. So it's contracting down and locking everything in, and it's essentially a max effort brace. So you're going to essentially do a max effort plank. You're going to brace everything, flex your whole body while really trying to bear down and lock that brace in. Hold it for 10 or 15 seconds and then relax.
So do we actually move our elbows down, or is it just
No, it's just the act of contracting down on that. Does that make sense? So you can all try that. What's up? If that's all you can do, that's all you can do. Then you just do multiples.
But you have to keep breathing, yeah?
Yeah. So what you can do, you can do both. So you can do both, right? If you think about like a max effort squat, you're not going to breathe midway through a max effort squat. So it carries over to that. But again, you should be able to also brace and breathe through that.
The TA thing, I can like do that feeling, the stop
Yeah.
thing, but it doesn't feel like it's connected to anything else. Like,
So it's the contraction we're looking for. Find the front of your hips.
yeah.
Just come into your midline a little bit from your hips towards your belly button, and then contract your TA, and you should be able to feel it. So contract your TA. Yeah, so it's in there, right?
Okay.
So it takes heaps of practice, right? So being able to lock all of that in is going to be the first part. The plank's a really good one. The next progression in that, we're going to look at some anti-rotation stuff. There you go. So the next one is called a Palov press, and is an anti-rotation drill. We're going to do that quickly, and then that's pretty much going to be the extent of it, right? If you can get through all of this regularly, you'll be doing pretty well. Does that make sense? All right, I'm just going to grab a band. You guys feel free to keep practicing. How you doing, Chris? Okay, so what we've done so far is mostly anti-extension, anti-flexion stuff, right? So extension being that movement, flexion being that movement. It's all about locking everything in that plane of motion, right? This is an anti-rotation drill, which has a slightly less carryover to a squat or a deadlift because you don't do a lot of rotating in a squat or a deadlift. If you do, you've got issues. But this is especially relevant for just sort of overall balance, but becomes even more relevant for like field sport athletes and things like that because there's a lot more rotational stuff in that. So Palov press, all you're going to do is set up a relatively small band. It doesn't have to be a very big one because this is actually quite a tough drill when you do it properly, right? What you're going to do is set up in a lunge position with your back leg stacked so that your knee is directly below your hip is directly below your shoulder. You're not in this position. Locked in, you're going to be able to set that brace, front knees at 90. All you're going to do is set the band, and then your arms start straight, and all you're going to do is bring the band in and then push it back out. And what I'm resisting is that rotation, right? So you actually have to fight quite hard to be able to maintain that brace and go through that range of motion, right? It's not like a just fucking bang them out at 1,000,000 miles an hour sort of thing. It is a slow and controlled, can you resist the rotation while maintaining that brace? And then you can try the other side. Does that make sense? None of you are strong enough to be using a band thicker than this, except maybe Venny, and even then I don't reckon he's strong enough. So this isn't one you do. Yes, there is a slightly lighter one, I think. Failing that, you just go closer. Or rather than hooking it around something so thick, you hook it around like a rack on the weight where you're not taking as much of the tension. So that's the power press. The other big thing in terms of this core training stuff is carrying things. So farmer's walks, suitcase carries, which is essentially a one-handed farmer's walk, they're fantastic for this because it's all about being able to brace and then carry it under load, right? That's essentially all I have for you this morning. That progression should be enough to give you all something to practice. Find the point where you really started to struggle with those things because they did really sort of start at the baseline and work up from there, and you can just start practicing at that point. I would suggest all of you probably need to do most of it on a daily basis, or at the very least every time you train. I would do some of them as a warm-up to help you make that conscious connection before you start lifting, and then do the rest of it at the end of your lifting where you're already fatigued and you're having to work harder under that. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions?
Which ones would be better before and which ones would be better after?
The lower level ones would be better before. So just that feet flat, brace, lift your foot. The wall bugs, that sort of stuff is better pre-lifting because it's lower intensity, but you're getting the activation side of things, and then the harder, more intense ones happen down the road, like after you finish training. Does that make sense? Yeah. Excellent. Happy with that?
Thanks.
Excellent. Those of you that either came in late or the people that aren't here and are watching this later, if you have any questions, let me know. I will.
Go look at the camera when you say.
I did. You just didn't watch because you were looking at the floor. So I will, either I or Venny will cut this together and I'll put it all on YouTube, and then there'll be a link in the Facebook group. So feel free to watch this again. If you have any questions at any point, or if at some point you're training and you want me to have a look at what you're doing, just grab me and I will take you through it. Happy?
Happy.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
I will see you guys soon.